Hi, my name is Christy. Welcome back to my channel. This is the last installment of what has unintentionally become a series of how to make lace-up corset backs. This one is a little bit different because this one is completely handmade. I did my normal ordering the corset kit like I usually do, and the colors weren't even close, like not even a cute color combination. Because isn't that fresh and new, ordering something online and it didn't come as expected? I still need to return those. Since I had to chop off a lot from the bottom, I used that material to make an exact match for a lace-up corset back. This is a great way to upsize a dress if the zipper just isn't doing it. I promise this is going to be the last corset lace-up video in a while. Thanks for sticking it through. I'll link the other ones because they're all slightly different from each other. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like this video. If you're ready, I'm ready. I'm so excited. Thanks so much for being here. I want to use some boning for stability, but it comes rolled up on a coil. So first step is to straighten it. This type of boning is plastic, but it is pretty durable and can stand some steam heat from an iron, but just to make sure it doesn't melt, I'm using a pillowcase as a barrier. Then while it's still warm, add a book on top to flatten it further. I was impatient and already started seam ripping the zipper off just to see what I was getting myself into. This particular dress has a lining, but only at the top part of the bodice. The zipper measured 11 inches, so I'll make the corset 1 inch longer just to be safe. Next is just to seam rip the rest of the zipper off without injuring myself. Ow! Jack the seam ripper strikes again. This is certainly the most tedious part of the entire project, but eventually the zipper will come loose. The corset will be nestled in between these two layers of the bodice, and looks like the lower part will need to attach to just the lining skirt. After hemming the dress, this is the leftover lining fabric and the outer chiffon layer. To make each side of the corset that will house the laces, I've measured 12 inches long and 3 inches wide. After ironing it flat, cut out a matching piece of the chiffon layer, pin the two long sides and sew these layers together, or serge. Then fold over once and sew with your sewing machine. Or if you don't have a serger, fold over twice and sew with your sewing machine. Iron it again, and eventually we will fold this over and fit the laces and boning inside, but first we need to make the laces. Each lace will be about 2 inches, so I've measured more or less 22-ish inches long for the laces. Better to go longer than shorter. And it's about 1.5 inches wide. And just as before, I've measured the chiffon layer to match. Double layers are tricky. Carefully fold over, making sure that the top layer doesn't slip, and pin both layers with right sides facing each other. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure you are catching all 4 layers the entire length. And here at the seam is where my first challenge began, which you will see later. Trim down the excess seam allowance. Place a safety pin at one end and feed it through the middle to turn the laces right side out. Getting it started is half the battle, and that seam didn't make it any easier. This was quite a struggle. I struggled with this for longer than I care to admit. Now that we have one long piece, cut each of the laces into 2.5 inch long strips. This will make the laces 2 inches long with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on either end. Keep cutting until you have 8 laces. Going back to the 12-inch pieces we made earlier, and by the way, hopefully by now you have made a second one for the other side, measure in 1 inch on either end, and on this particular 12-inch corset, this leaves us 10 inches to fit in the laces. Measure the middle and evenly place the laces. Your corset may need to be longer or shorter, so just evenly place them whatever length apart looks correct. Just be sure to replicate that exact same measurements on the other side so that the laces line up. Starting at that inch measurement from the end, pin the laces in place according to your measurements. On mine, they were 1.25 inches apart. Once you are happy with the placement, fold over the other side and repin, now including the top layer. After repinning all of the laces, fold in each end 1/4 inch and pin. This will hide all the raw edges. For extra strength, sew the entire length twice, pivoting at the end with your needle still in the fabric. And for extra strength, I am sewing another back and forth line of stitching closer to the edge. Now that our boning is nice and flat, it's also pointy, so make sure you round off the edges so that it does not come through the fabric. You also want to cut the boning to be shorter than the length of the corset to avoid sewing over it. Mine was a little over 10 inches long. Insert the boning between the layers and then sew the ends closed. And just when you thought you were done, repeat all of those steps so that you have two sides. I know it doesn't look like it here with this camera angle, but they do line up. Moving on to inserting the corset into the dress. Now, to avoid taking apart the entire dress, I opted to hand sew this small top portion. To make sure nothing slips while sewing, I've clipped and pinned the corset in place. After sewing in place, you should only see the loops sticking out. Just some regular old hand sewing, nothing fancy. Hide the knot and then take a small piece of the fabric on either side and ladder stitch it closed. To make sure it held in place and that there were no visible stitches from the outside, I had to hand sew the corset to the lining and then to the outer shell separately. To make it a little easier and quicker, I was able to use my machine for the lower portion but could only get so close. The little gap that was left was easily closed with a little more hand sewing. After both sides of the corset are sewn in place, the only step left is to make the straps to lace up the corset. Now, I'm not sure if it was because I used the double fabric to make sure it was perfectly matched with the dress, or it just wasn't wide enough, but this step was the most difficult for me. I'm doing this the same way I did to make the laces, folding over the fabric in half with right sides together, and make sure you carefully pin and sew to catch all of the layers. Once again, trim down the seam allowance, safety pin, and send it through the middle, then struggle for a really long time trying to get it right side out. If I were to do this again with the double fabric, I think I would just make it wider. And I'm done. Please enjoy this final reveal with my lovely model, Angela.